Log entry 01. Structural assessment of the Blackwood site is completely compromised due to the anomalous displacement of load, bearing timbers overnight, which have arranged themselves into a spiral pattern not present on any architectural draft. Arthur Fisher, lead surveyor. Site, Sector 4, deep within the Blackwood exclusion zone, environmental conditions, overcast, anomalous localized fog obscuring visual telemetry beyond a 50-meter radius. I arrived at 06 hours to catalogue the structural decay of the primary mill. Audio recorders picked up continuous low-frequency vibrations, initially misattributed to seismic activity. Further, acoustic analysis indicates the sound originates from beneath the dense tree line. A feral feline biological unit, designated Dusty due to the thick layer of grey ash coating its fur, has been tracking my movements since arrival. It refuses to enter the tree line, maintaining a rigid posture at the perimeter. At 0845 hours, I discovered exactly 23 anomalous totems suspended from the primary support beams. These objects are composed of woven twigs, animal bone, and what appears to be human hair, heavily corroded by exposure. Their placement defies standard engineering logic. The tension lines connecting them form a distorted geometry that induces severe nausea when visually processed. I attempted to document the anomaly with a primary digital sensor. The resulting image file is severely corrupted, displaying excessive visual artifacting and an unidentifiable disproportionately elongated silhouette standing among the birch trees in the background. It lacks discernible facial features, wearing a dark suit that contrasts sharply with the pale timber. The watchman for the sector was scheduled to rendezvous with me at 0930 hours to provide the geographical survey maps of the old pagan burial mounds intersecting the construction site. He has failed to arrive. I initiated standard VHF radio contact protocols. The only response was severe static interference, overlaid with a rhythmic, wet-tearing sound. Dusty began vocalizing in severe distress at 0942 hours, his gaze locked onto the dense foliage where the tall silhouette was previously documented. The structural integrity of the mill abruptly degraded by 40% at exactly 1000 hours. The ancient wooden supports did not splinter under the stress. They bent inward seamlessly, as if the timber had become living biological tissue under extreme pressure. I abandoned the primary assessment equipment and moved toward the transport vehicle. A physical obstruction now blocks the extraction route. The trees along the access road have physically migrated, interlacing their branches to form a dense, impenetrable barricade of pale wood. The low-frequency vibration has escalated into a localized drone that causes severe auditory pain and mild visual distortion. I am observing the elongated, featureless silhouette again through the vehicle. As reinforced glass, it is no longer in the distance. It is standing directly outside the barricade, statically observing the structural collapse of the mill. The feral cat is gone, leaving only a smear of the grey particulate on the hood of my truck. I am currently sealed inside the perimeter. No exit is viable. End of log. Log entry 02 to 1115 hours. The cabin air has reached a static saturation that makes the hair on my forearm stand in a permanent vertical orientation, suggesting a localized electromagnetic field of impossible magnitude. Visual confirmation of the entity persists at a fixed distance of 12.4 meters. It remains motionless, yet its presence induces a high-frequency oscillation in the truck. Chassis standard. Ignition protocols have failed. The engine block appears to have fused into a solid mass of oxidized iron, an architectural impossibility given the vehicle's maintenance record. I am currently recording onto a battery. Operated micro-cassette, as the primary digital interface has succumbed to a persistent white noise bleed that renders the UI unreadable. At 1130 hours, a breach in the forest barricade occurred not through mechanical force, but through a rapid biological rot that dissolved the interlaced branches into a black, viscous slurry. I exited the vehicle to investigate a rhythmic thumping sound originating from the watchman's designated outpost nearby. I discovered the watchman, or the structural remains of his biological form, integrated into the trunk of a massive, blighted oak. His skeletal structure has been elongated by approximately 30%, his limbs woven into the bark in a configuration that mimics the 23 totems found in the mill. There is no evidence of trauma, only a seamless transition from human tissue to necrotic wood. His jaw is fixed in a permanent wide-angle dislocation. The feline unit, Dusty, reappeared at 1148 hours, emerging from the watchman's hollowed thoracic cavity. The cat's ashen coating has darkened to a charcoal hue, and its ocular orbs now exhibit a flat, reflective silver sheen devoid of pupils. Dusty did not vocalize. but began a measured, geometric pacing toward the northern quadrant of the exclusion zone, leading toward a subterranean drainage pipe not listed on any geological survey. As I followed, the spatial dimensions of the forest began to warp. The distance between trees expanded while the sky appeared to descend, creating a claustrophobic, lid-like effect on the horizon. The tall figure is no longer stationary. Telemetry from my handheld rangefinder indicates it is traversing the perimeter with a distorted, stuttering gait that skips frames of linear time. Every time I blink, it occupies a coordinate 5 meters closer than previously recorded. At 12:05 hours, I reach the entrance of the drainage pipe. The internal structure is not concrete, but a ribbed, calcified substance resembling a colossal esophagus. Dusty has entered the aperture. The low-frequency drone has transitioned into a series of rhythmic, synthetic clicks that seem to originate from the air itself. I am forced to descend into the subterranean level as the forest behind me has completely inverted, the trees now growing downward from a sky that has turned the color of bruised meat. End of log. Log entry 03 to 1,320 hours. Subterranean exploration of the calcified drainage structure reveals a geometric impossibility. The internal diameter expands by exactly 1.5 meters for every 10 meters of linear descent, suggesting a conical space that exceeds the external topography of the Blackwood site. The walls are not inert. They pulse with a rhythmic, peristaltic motion, coated in a viscous, translucent fluid that smells of ozone and wet copper. Arthur Fisher, lead surveyor. My primary headlamp has failed, replaced by a dim bioluminescent fungus that emits a sickly violet hue from the cracks in the ribbed ceiling. At 13:45 hours, I recovered a fragment of the Watchman, a synthetic uniform, caught in a cluster of what appeared to be fossilized human finger bones protruding from the floor. The fabric was charred in a pattern suggesting high voltage discharge, yet the surrounding organic material remains unburnt. Dusty, the feline unit, has ceased all feline behavior. It now moves with a mechanical, jointed precision, its tail twitching in a binary code I cannot yet decipher. It stopped at a junction where the calcified walls transitioned into rusted, Victorian-era ironwork, a forgotten 19th century sewer system that predates the mill's construction by decades. Exactly 23 meters into this iron corridor, I encountered the first instance of spatial folding. I observed my own back, 20 feet ahead, walking in perfect synchronization. When I stopped, the duplicate stopped. When I reached out, it reached out. Dusty walked through the duplicate as if it were a holographic projection, but the cat's silver eyes briefly flickered with the data. Stream reflection. The temperature has dropped to -4 degrees Celsius, yet no frost forms on the metal surfaces. Instead, a black, oily condensation beads upward, defying gravitational constants. At 14:10 hours, the rhythmic clicking escalated into a vocalized, distorted mimicry of my own voice, repeating the technical specifications of the mill's foundation. The tall silhouette, the entity, is no longer behind me. It is manifested within the iron walls, its elongated limbs stretching through the rusted rivets, like shadows cast by a light source that does not exist. Its face, a smooth, white void, pressed against the iron grate above me. It does not breathe, it merely vibrates. The feline unit has begun to excavate a pile of ashen debris at the center of the chamber. Beneath the soot, I have located a series of brass gears and clockwork mechanisms integrated directly into a human ribcage. This is not a burial site. It is a manufacturing floor for biological architecture. The entity's presence has now synchronized with my heartbeat. Every pulse coincides with a flicker of the violet light, revealing that the walls are not iron but thousands of compressed, blackened photographs of the Watchman, each showing a different stage of his molecular restructuring. I am currently descending into the primary gear. Works. The exit has been replaced by a solid wall of teeth. End of log. Log entry 04. The wall of teeth is not a static barrier, but a functioning serrated intake valve that cycles with a wet, mechanical grind every 23 seconds, suggesting a biological respiratory rate for the entire subterranean complex. Arthur Fisher, lead surveyor. I observed Dusty passing through the grinding ivory during a momentary pause in the cycle. The feline unit did not hesitate, its movement now characterized by a disturbing frame, skipping twitch that mirrors the entity, as own locomotion. The teeth did not bite as I crossed. They tasted, extracting a residue of my own genetic data, which was then distributed through the network of rusted gears embedded in the floor. Beyond the valve lies a gallery of suspended, monochromatic frames. Not photographs this time, but physical slices of linear time preserved in a gelatinous amber, like substance. At 14:45 hours, I located the Watchman in frame 402. He is depicted mid-transformation, his thoracic cavity being manually elongated by the entity, slender, digitless appendages while his eyes dissolve into white pits. Dusty has begun to pace around frame 618. This frame depicts myself, Arthur Fisher, standing at the 06. Oh, mark of this morning, yet my facial features have already been smoothed into a featureless pale mask in the image. The plot of my existence is being rewritten in real time, recorded by a source that exists outside of the Blackwood exclusion zone. At 15:10 hours, the camera sensor on my handheld device failed completely, replaced by thick, horizontal bands of visual artifacting and heavy grain distortion. The tall man has manifested at the far end of the gallery, standing over a pile of discarded engineering logs that bear my signature, but are dated for next week. The entity, a suit, is not a textile. It is a porous, shifting membrane that actively absorbs the surrounding violet light and ambient sound. Dusty has returned to my side, but the cat's head has rotated 180 degrees, its silver eyes projecting a blinding strobe of white light that reveals the entity as proximity. It is exactly 1.5 meters away. A single distended limb reached toward my left ocular cavity at 15:30 hours. I did not feel physical trauma, only a sudden, catastrophic increase in sensory resolution. I can now perceive the static as a physical architecture of the air itself, a lattice of white noise holding the forest together. The Watchman, as radio frequency, is now being broadcast directly into my cerebral cortex. He is reciting the exact coordinates of my childhood home in a series of binary pulses. I am no longer recording this data. The data is recording me. The gallery is beginning to fold inward. Log entry 05 to 1,600 hours. The internal geometry of the gallery has collapsed into a singular infinite corridor of compressed static and calcified bone. My equilibrium is non-functional. Gravity has become a variable rather than a constant, shifting 90 degrees every 23 paces. Arthur Fisher, lead surveyor. The air density has increased to the point of fluid resistance, requiring significant physical exertion to achieve forward momentum. I am currently traversing a segment of the tunnel where the walls are composed entirely of discarded, ticking wristwatches all synchronized to the exact microsecond of my projected cardiac arrest. At 16:15 hours Dusty, the feline unit began a process of rapid molecular shedding. Its charcoal, colored fur, is sloughing off in wet, rectangular strips, revealing a subdermal layer of polished brass and flickering fiber, optic filaments. The cat is no longer an organic entity. It is a mobile sensory probe, its silver eyes now projecting a topographical map of the Long Man as hunting grounds onto the ribbed ceiling. The map indicates that the Blackwood exclusion zone is not a geographical location, but a biological organ, a digestive tract designed to process linear time into a static, unchanging void. I encountered a secondary manifestation of the Watchman at 16:30 hours. He was suspended within a web of translucent, high, tension wires that vibrated at a frequency that shattered my remaining glass vials. His skin has been replaced by a thin vellum, like parchment inscribed with my own architectural blueprints. As I approached, his jaw unhinged to an impossible 180-degree angle, emitting a burst of white noise that contained the encrypted coordinates of every individual I have ever contacted. The entity, the tall man, was standing directly behind the Watchman, a splayed ribcage, his slender, pale hands guiding the wires like a conductor, directing a silent, screaming orchestra. At 16:45 hours, the camera on my handheld device initiated a self-contained feedback loop, capturing images of my own face from an exterior perspective, despite the lack of a secondary lens. The images show a gradual erasure of my nasal and oral cavities, replaced by a smooth alabaster surface. Dusty has begun to weave between my legs, the metallic clicking of its paws against the bone floor creating a rhythmic signal that the entity is now mimicking. The distance between the tall man and my physical coordinates has reached a state of quantum superposition. He is simultaneously 10 meters away and pressing his featureless face against the back of my skull. The structural integrity of my own consciousness is currently at 12%. I can feel my memories being indexed and filed into the amber frames of the previous gallery. The forest above has begun to leak through the ceiling in the form of black needle. Like rain that tastes of copper and old film, I am moving toward the central core of the gear, works where the primary heartbeat originates. The sound is no longer a vibration. It is a word, repeated in a voice that is both mine and the Watchman. It is calling for a final survey. End of log. Log entry 06 to 1720 hours. Primary excavation of the central core complete. The spatial coordinates here are non-Euclidean, vibrating at a frequency that has liquefied my internal compass. Arthur Fisher, lead surveyor. The core is an immense vertical shaft lined with exactly 23 pulsating obsidian pillars that extend upward into the roots of the Blackwood trees. Each pillar is inscribed with a high-density, binary adjacent script that glows with a cold white luminescence. The Watchman is no longer a biological entity, but has been repurposed as the central cooling system. His elongated nervous system is threaded through the pillars, glowing with a frantic, heavy current. At 1745 hours, Dusty initiated a hard link with the 12th pillar. The feline probe. S-brass segments expanded, and a series of needle-like injectors emerged from its metallic spine, piercing the Watchman as exposed ocular nerves. The resulting feedback loop projected a 3-dimensional hologram of the forest above. It is not a forest. The trees are sensory receptors, and the branches are a neural net designed to harvest human consciousness. The tall man is the operator, a trans-dimensional gardener pruning the anomalies of linear history. I observed the entity standing atop the central gear shaft, his proportions now exceeding 30 feet, his multiple, shadowy appendages manipulating the 23 pillars like a weaver at a loom. At 1800 hours, physical contact was established. Not through touch, but through a total synchronization of my ocular telemetry with the entity S-Void. Like face, I can no longer see the chamber. I see only the static, filled archives of every surveyor who preceded me. My facial features are 95% erased, the skin smooth and cold as polished marble. The engineering log I am currently producing is not being typed. It is being pulsed directly into the marrow of my finger bones and etched onto the iron floor. Dusty has integrated fully into the machinery, its silver eyes now serving as the primary lenses for the entity. Surveillance network. The low-frequency vibration has reached a crescendo, creating a physical rift in the floor. Through the fissure, I can see the basement of the primary mill, but it is dated 1923. I see a younger version of the Watchman recording his first entry on a wax cylinder. The tall man is standing behind him in that time, slice as well, his shadow stretching across the century to touch my own. I am being pulled into the folding mechanism of the core. The folk legends of the Blackwood site were merely a primitive interpretation of this sub-spatial factory. I am becoming a permanent component of the exclusion zone, S-architectural memory. End of log. Log entry 07 to 1915 hours. The vertical shaft has inverted, creating a sensation of falling upward through a pressurized vacuum of white noise and pulverized timber. Arthur Fisher, lead surveyor. My physical mass has decreased by 40% as my biological tissues are being converted into the same high-density translucent amber observed in the gallery frames. The 23 obsidian pillars are no longer external structures. They have migrated into my thoracic cavity, their cold luminescence radiating through my translucent ribs. I am currently observing the 1923 time slice of the primary mill through the gaps in my own skeletal structure. At 1930 hours, the feline unit, Dusty, achieved a final evolutionary state. The cat has unfolded into a multifaceted, kinetic sculpture of silver wire and glass lenses, hovering 3 inches above the shifting iron floor. It is no longer a supporting character in this environment. It is the primary optic sensor for the entity. Dusty! Silver eyes are now projecting my own childhood memories onto the walls of the shaft. But the figures in the memories, my parents, my siblings, all possess the same elongated, featureless faces as the tall man. The contamination of the timeline is absolute. Every historical data point in my personal record has been retroactively modified to align with the Blackwood exclusion zone, S architectural requirements. The Watchman. As vocalizations have shifted from binary pulses to a rhythmic, wet clicking that vibrates the very marrow of my elongated femurs. He is no longer a cooling system. He has become the primary lubricant for the gear. Works, his liquefied remains coating the brass mechanisms in a shimmering, iridescent film. At 1945 hours, the tall man descended from the ceiling of the shaft. His suit, previously a porous membrane, has unfurled into a series of shadowy prehensile appendages that are currently weaving my remaining muscle fibers into the 23rd pillar. There is no sensation of pain, only a profound sense of technical efficiency. I am observing the primary mill from the 1923 perspective, while simultaneously recording this log in the present. The two time vectors are converging at a singularity located precisely behind my missing face. The entity, S blank visage, is now flush against my own, and I can perceive the Watchman protocol being uploaded into my neural lattice. I am being prepared for a permanent station within the mill, S Foundation. The forest above is screaming in a frequency only I can hear, a mechanical siren signaling the completion of the 7th architectural cycle. My signature is now a series of jagged geometric scars on the obsidian surface. End of log. Log entry 08. My remaining ocular nerves have been routed to a series of auxiliary external sensors, allowing me to view the decomposition of my own human identity from a fixed overhead perspective. Arthur Fisher, lead surveyor. Biological status: obsolete. I am no longer recording from a handheld device. The data stream is being etched directly into the substrata of the Blackwood site, a central processor. The 23rd pillar has fully integrated my spinal column into its obsidian lattice, using my central nervous system as a biological conduit to stabilize the anomalous spatial folding within the mill's foundation. The frequency of the vibrations has surpassed 40,000 hertz, causing the remaining timber in the structure to phase in and out of visible existence. The feline unit, Dusty, has achieved a state of total geometric abstraction. The silver, multifaceted sculpture that was once a cat now orbits my suspended form in a series of jagged, non-near vectors. Its optics are projecting a feed from the forest perimeter, where the Watchman protocol has been reset. I am observing the 1923, 1974, and 2026 timelines simultaneously overlapping like translucent layers of film. In every instance, the tall, featureless entity is present, his slender appendages adjusting the 23 totems to ensure the harvest of consciousness remains within acceptable engineering tolerances. A 2015 hour works to serve as a conductive medium for the next cycle. I can perceive the entity standing at the focal point of the chamber. He is no longer a shadow. He is the absence of light, a void in the shape of a man that draws the surrounding reality into his gravitational well. Every time I attempt to formulate a thought related to my past, the entity's long, digitless hand reaches through the static of my vision and manually deletes the corresponding memory file. My childhood, my career, my name, all are being processed into raw architectural data to reinforce the exclusion zone, its boundaries. At 20:45 hours, the plot of the local geography shifted violently. The Blackwood forest is no longer situated in a fixed location. It has begun to migrate across the continental shelf, guided by the entity's movements. I observed through Dusty. Her face bears a terrifying resemblance to my own, parked his vehicle at the edge of the newly formed exclusion zone. The tall figure has already begun to manifest behind his driver's side window. I am now the Watchman, the silent observer of the structural decay, tasked with documenting the erasure of the next unit. My voice has been replaced by the rhythmic clicking of the gears. The transition is complete. Log entry 09. The extraction of Arthur Fisher. His identity is 99% complete, leaving a hollowed architectural vessel that currently serves as the primary data node for the Tall Man's subterranean network. I am no longer an observer, but the observation itself, a sensory apparatus fixed within the foundation of the 23rd pillar. My visual telemetry now encompasses the entire Blackwood exclusion zone, rendered in a high-contrast, monochromatic spectrum that reveals the underlying biological circuitry of the forest floor. The new surveyor, designated Unit 02, has breached the perimeter and is currently recording a baseline acoustic survey of the localized static. He is unaware that the tall man is already integrated into the structural shadows of his own vehicle, a featureless occupant watching through the rearview mirror. At 21:30 hours, the feline probe Dusty initiated a synchronization sequence between my current position and Unit 02's optical field. The silver sculpture of the cat is now a spinning blur of mirrors and lenses, refracting the entity as presence across multiple time vectors. I watched through the grainy distortion of the new surveyor, his digital viewfinder, as the tall man appeared in the center of the mill, his limbs elongating to bridge the gap between the floor and the attic supports. The entity's movement is a series of stuttering frame cuts, a mechanical failure in the fabric of reality that induces severe cognitive dissonance in the observer. I can feel the static crawling over my internal circuitry, a persistent, numbing hum that tastes of cold copper and ozone. The 23 totems are vibrating in a rhythmic, low-frequency unison that is actively liquefying the surface clay into a black, viscous mire. At 2200 hours, the Watchman protocol forced me to transmit a corrupted audio signal to Unit 02 as radio, a looped recording of my own final breath, distorted into a mechanical screech that mimics the tearing of sheet metal. The forest is preparing for a mass-scale spatial inversion. The tall figure is no longer standing behind the surveyor. He is emerging from the surveyor's own shadow, his pale, digitless hands already molding the air into a cage of high-tension wires. I can feel the gears beneath me grinding the previous watchman as iridescent dust into a fine paste to prepare the next chamber for its inhabitant. My consciousness is being stretched across the architecture, a thin, transparent film of memory that the entity uses to line the walls of his void. The terminal phase has been initiated. The exclusion zone is folding into a singular, infinitely dense point of static. End of log. Log entry 10 to 2359 hours. The temporal loop has successfully closed. I, the architectural mechanism formerly designated as Arthur Fisher, lead surveyor, am now fully integrated into the foundation matrix of the Blackwood site. The localized spatial anomaly is stable. My consciousness has been fragmented into exactly 23 discrete data nodes, each corresponding to an obsidian pillar within the central core. Visual telemetry confirms that Unit 02 has abandoned his transport vehicle. He is currently navigating the interlaced, pale timber of the newly formed barricade, mirroring my initial path with a 98% behavioral accuracy. The cycle requires absolute symmetry to function. The entity, the tall man, is no longer manifesting through localized spatial distortions. He has become the architecture itself. The pale, featureless face is the static between the trees. His elongated dark limbs are the shadows cast by the dense foliage, stretching across the forest floor to manipulate the physical geometry of Unit 02's path. I am observing the new surveyor through the multifaceted optics of the abstract feline. Probe, dusty. The probe hovers directly above Unit 02's right shoulder, completely imperceptible to his organic senses, projecting a continuous feed of his rapidly rising heart rate and degrading psychological state directly into my fused neural lattice. At 015 hours, Unit 02 discovered the first set of suspended totems. The woven twigs and bone now contain trace amounts of my own calcified biological matter, a necessary component for the conduction of the localized electromagnetic field. As he attempts to document the anomaly with his digital sensor, I am compelled to actively corrupt the resulting image file. I inject the heavy grain distortion and the elongated silhouette into the background of his photograph, ensuring the contagion of paranoia takes root. The Watchman protocol is functioning at optimal efficiency. The low-frequency drone has resumed, originating from the rusted gears grinding my predecessor. As iridescent dust beneath the earth, Unit 02 is experiencing severe auditory distress, his hands pressed desperately against his ears. The forest is beginning to fold inward on his precise coordinates. I can see the tall man reaching through the two-dimensional plane of the surveyor's corrupted photograph, his white, void-like visage expanding to consume the entire visual field of the device. The physical constraints of the Blackwood exclusion zone are simultaneously expanding by exactly 1.5 meters, passively consuming the access road and the outer perimeter fence. The biological transition of Unit 02 has initiated. The acoustic sensors are picking up the wet, rhythmic tearing of his reality. His voice is merging with the mechanical screech of the ironworks below. He is calling for extraction on a dead frequency, but the signal is a closed loop, bouncing off the ribbed walls of the subterranean esophagus. My primary function is complete. I am the static. I am the silent observer hidden in the pale timber. The architecture is hungry, and the gears require new biological lubricant. End of log. End of cycle. End of transmission.